to Two Crime Writers on a Microphone. Our guest this week is the wonderful Mr. Stuart Neville. How are you doing, Stuart?
I'm doing all right. Hello, everybody. Yeah, okay, I can't complain.
Well, you can if you wanted to. I mean,
I can. My knees are playing me up. You know, my joints are a bit sore. I'm getting older. The gates of mortality are opening before me in the far distance.
oh, we've got that.
All of that, it's all right.
I mean, we've got that deep already. The Gates of Mortality. That's a great name for a book. The Gates of Mortality.
I made it up. I'm back saying
that. You can't copyright titles. We all know this. My legal battle with Lisa Jewell did not last long.
Oh, fair enough.
Of course, I like Lisa, so it was a difficult
one. The first Gates of Mortality sounds a bit literary, though. Anyway,
does a little bit.
Yeah.
But have you seen some of the titles that are in crime fiction right now? I mean, I think you could get away with it.
Possibly, but we'll see. I'll have to write a book that actually merits it.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, if you don't do it within like 12 months, I think I might use it.
All right, fair enough.
As a first draft, I mean, like, go to my editor and then she just go, "This is great, it's fantastic. We're changing the title," and I'll go, "Okay." So, this is like episode 5 of the new series, and I've already had 3 members of the Fun Loving Crime Writers on. Just so people are aware, it's not anything other than absolute nepotism.
Sure, yeah.
But it's also a way of me discovering more about people that I spend a hell of a lot of time with. But it's all very much like we don't start talking about our childhoods, do we? We mainly talk about, what songs we can play and that kind of thing, don't we?
Yeah, that and whoever's pissed us off recently.
Yeah, I mean, I was being nice. I mean, it is mostly just like, have you heard what so and so's done? But it is just a way of me finding that out. And like, I've got the Wikipedia article. You have got one. It's the shortest Wikipedia article I've found so far.
Yeah, I mean, apparently I've only written one book.
Yeah,
if you go by that,
it literally is just works and one book is meant. Oh, there is. Oh no, collusion is mentioned and rat lines is mentioned, so that might have changed. And it's got all the things that you were nominated for, but there's not a lot there. But we've also got the trusty book series and order website, which people who've listened to previous episodes will know is absolutely fantastic and sometimes wrong in hilarious ways. So I'm going to have that up as well. But let's start at the beginning. It says you were born in 1972. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that would make you're 51 this year.
Yeah.
Excellent. So this is, I think you are the second youngest member of the Fun Loving Crime Writers.
I am at the age of 51 to be the second youngest in any room is always quite nice.
I mean, that's why I love the band, is because I'm the oldest everywhere else except for in the band where I'm the baby.
Yeah.
Which, if I turn 40 this year, it's it's not. I'm not going to be classed as a baby for very much longer, I don't think.
Well, if you're the baby, am I the rebellious teenager?
I think so, and I think that is always known because of the t-shirts that you constantly wear, and that have always got the band names on it that, like, we might not have heard of, or like you just all of a sudden you'll have a Bowie one on and things like that. So I think you are the rebellious teenager. You let your hair grow long, your beard's getting bigger every day. You're the rebel of the group, which is probably something, having known a little bit about you in your childhood, I don't think rebel is something that you probably have been called a lot.
I did get suspended from school for having long hair.
Oh, let's come on to that in a bit. So you're born in 1972, and it says you were born. It doesn't say where you were born. It just says you were a fan and customer of the No Alibi bookstore. I don't know if that was the case in 1972, but
no. I unless I was a very early reader. No, I was born in Armagh, which is a market town, kind of about an hour away from Belfast. It's not very far from the border with the Republic of Ireland. Yeah, and that's where I grew up till I was about 18 before I went to college.
So Armagh in 1972. What did that look like?
Well, I don't know. I was in a pram. Um, if you, if you fast forward to about 1976, maybe. Well, I grew up on a council estate called Orangefield in Armagh. And Armagh, like most towns in Northern Ireland, had kind of an invisible border down the middle. And depending which church you didn't go to, you'd be on one side or the other. And Orangefield was sort of a Protestant / loyalist working class estate. Those kind of clustered together with other similar estates on that particular side of town. And yeah, it was fairly typical sort of council estate at the time, or housing executive estate of the time, to give it its proper name. And it's funny, my mum still lives there, and I go to, when I sort of take the kids over to see her, it's odd sort of driving in and seeing how small it seems now compared to what it was when I was like 4 or 5 or 6, when I was running the streets with the other kids. And things like, I mean, it was built in the 60s, and obviously they'd never had any idea that Ironbury would ever have cars at that time. So when you try to drive through it now, it's a struggle to get even down one street because everybody's parked on the footpaths or nose to tail. But yeah, it was part of that sort of time when there new sort of housing being built in the sort of 60s into the 70s. And yeah, it was just a bunch of us kids running about the streets, really, when I was a kid, playing football against the walls, that kind of thing. And already getting onto this topic, but this was the only thing I said apart from other council estates, is the fact that there were soldiers patrolling with automatic weapons, which we would just sort of say hello to and chat to and stuff as kids. But yeah, I mean, it was a fairly typical kind of working class estate, certainly, at least for Northern Ireland, anyway.
What was the makeup of the family? So you had your parents. Was you where was you? You got brothers and sisters?
I have two older sisters. I was the youngest. I was
the
baby.
Youngest. You were the baby. Yeah. And how much older than you were they?
There's 2 years between each of us. So my oldest sister is 4 years older than me, and the middle sister is 2 years older than me.
So what did your parents do when you were born? What were they working as?
My dad worked for an industrial bakery. I sort of say industrial. I don't want to call him a baker because that sort of brings to mind somebody like in an artisan bakery making granary loaves. No, he was in an industrial bakery where they're putting thousands of loaves of bread a day through big machines. Used to be a van would come and collect them at 5 o'clock in the morning and bring them to work along with a bunch of other men. When I got to ride in this van a couple of times, and it was back in the 70s, early 80s, when a passenger van was 2 wooden benches bolted to the floor of either side of a transit van with no hints of seatbelts or anything. My mum was a receptionist. That's what she always did, for whether various companies or public sector. It was just answering phones, basically.
So your parents were working,
and
you had older sisters. You were the youngest. What's your earliest memory? What's your earliest memory?
My very earliest memory is actually being in hospital. I had
not when you were born.
No. A few years later, I remember being left in hospital. I was kind of being tricked into looking the other way by my mum Scarpard because I was being kept in hospital. I don't clearly remember the actual treatment. I was in traction for quite a while. Though I don't specifically remember that, but I remember being on the ward. I basically had issues with my legs. There was something wrong with my legs. I couldn't walk properly when I was a toddler. And my clearest memories are being left in the hospital and being on the ward, and there being another kid on the ward, a little girl, who had loads of toys, and I didn't have any. So I used to steal her toys, and I'd wander off around the hospital, and then forget to bring the toys back when I was constantly getting in trouble for that. But yeah, I had a few spells in hospital, including some time in traction, which I don't remember the traction. I don't remember any of the treatment. I just remember being there. And yeah, that's probably the earliest thing. And I remember coming back home and still to this day, not really understanding why I was there, what exactly the issue was, what I was in hospital for, but I just remember being there.
That's interesting. Like, you know, you went through this possibly quite traumatic thing, but you don't really remember it.
No, I mean, I imagine I was about 2 or 3 at the time.
Yeah.
It was when I was a toddler, and it's just I have very clear memories of the ward itself and so on, and the toys, stealing the toys sticks in my head. That's really all I remember about it, and yeah, that and just kind of around the States, starting at school and so on, and where the school I went to initially for so primary 1, primary 2, primary 3, there was a school on the estate that was specifically for kids from that area. And it only did sort of first 3 years of school. And I was moved from that school early because I was ahead in my reading. I was moved to the big school in town, which for me at the time, that I remember as being a really scary thing. And also being the end of me having friends on the estate. Because all of a sudden I was in a different school and I wasn't with these other kids during the day, and kind of losing that social circle I had when I was younger. I've skipped ahead a few years. I was probably about 6 or 7 when that happened.
So okay, well, let's just go back a little bit then. Is when you were first at school, it was more, you felt more a part of the community because all of the kids went to the same place.
Yeah.
So what was it? What was I mean, I don't know the school makeup in Northern Ireland. I don't know if it's similar as it is in England. I mean, because we have like a primary school that just runs through to year 11.
Yeah.
You're saying it's only 3 years. What's that about?
That's not a common thing. That was an unusual thing. It was specifically for kids on. I think it was designed to cater for kids on this sort of cluster of estates at that side of town, because again, it wasn't the norm for people to have cars.
Yeah.
Families wouldn't have cars to get them to all their schools. So it was to allow for younger kids who couldn't maybe walk to school, who were too young to walk to school. So it wasn't the common thing, but education in Northern Ireland is still kind of messed up. We essentially have 2 parallel systems. There's what's really officially the state school system, but it's kind of de facto the Protestant school system. Then there's the Catholic Church maintained school systems. You have these 2 independent education sectors running side by side, and it's completely ungainly and ridiculous and preposterous. And so I'm a very big supporter of integrated education. But yeah, and so most kids would just go to a primary school like you would there from P1 to P7, but it'd be segregated for the large part by religion.
Yeah.
As daft as that is.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably a religion kind of segregation is probably something you're quite used to. What was it like though? That it was the community, because like coming from the same kind of background, the community within working class council estates is always something that I remember being really close knit and things like that. Was it the same there, or was there that divide in there?
Well, no, when I was very young, there was the kids have been running in and out of each other's houses. You wouldn't necessarily know which house you'd wind up in for your jam sandwiches at lunchtime. During the summer holidays, you could be any house along the street. And I remember there was one woman who kind of unofficially ran kind of daycare for kids after school, who was on our street, and all the kids had to go to her house, and you don't move, you get a clip around the ear. But yeah, I remember, and nobody had phones in their houses. Very few people had cars and stuff. Yeah, so everything was very much neighbor talking to neighbor in a way that has completely vanished since then. Even still on that estate, it's not really there anymore. So all my friends, my entire world, were the kids and the adults that lived within 2 or 3 streets of me. And that's why then it was such a big upheaval then to move school early.
Yeah.
And go to the big school in town, because it was all of a sudden separated me from all those kids that had been running about with a few years previously.
Was you at that time as well? Was you close with your older sisters, or did they have their own thing going on at that point?
We were then. I mean, we're all quite close in age, so yeah. So we'd either been playing together or beating the shit out of each other. Was pretty much the way things went. And these are back in the days when it wasn't a big deal to be left in the house on your own.
Mm.
And these are the days when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, being kicked out of the door first thing in the morning and not coming back again until tea time. Yeah, so everything was quite closely knit, which I think is the way with those kind of working class estates.
Yeah. What was home life like? You talk about you moved to the big school because you were ahead in your reading and stuff like that. Was it an encouraging kind of household, or were your mum and dad both working hard and had 3 kids to support, and it was a bit more difficult?
It was encouraging from my mom, not so much from my dad. He would. I suppose he had a hard enough life. He'd be leaving for work at 5 o'clock in the morning. He'd come home in the afternoon, and you wouldn't really interact with us an awful lot, to be honest. There wasn't really much of a relationship there. Mostly be him falling asleep in the armchair. But my mum would encourage me to read, and she went to actually working for the library service. She'd only been a receptionist in where the sort of hub where the local library service kept all their stock of books. And there's a few years, a wee bit older at this stage, but that's where a lot of the reading came from. And that I had this we didn't have money for books to buy at home. We'd never had really many books kept at home. There was a steady supply coming from the library service, because my mum worked where the stock was kept. So if you wanted to read anything, you could just tell her in the morning, she'd come home with it that evening. And music as well, actually, to an extent. Yeah, so she encouraged me, and also I developed a love of film very, very early on in cinema. Another of my earliest memories is my first ever trip to the cinema, which I think when I was 6. And there was a cinema in Armagh called the Ritz, and it was exactly what you think a place called the Ritz. Like a proper old flea pit cinema.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, one of my memories of that is everybody being crammed into this place, and you could see the projector beam thick with blue smoke from the cigarettes. And yeah, my mom took me to see a movie. I didn't know anything about it. Didn't know what I was going to see. This was in 1978, and it was Star Wars during its second run. I think it would have been in the cinema. And I remember my little 6-year-old mind being just blown out of the back of my skull. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. It was like the second coming of Christ. It was just astonishing. And so that really got me interested in movies. And part of the thing about losing the friends I had on the estate was I was spending my Saturday afternoons, instead of going out and playing football, I was spending my afternoons at home either playing with my toys or watching the Saturday matinees. On like BBC Two, you'd have, I had no interest in sports, so my dad was off at the pub or playing golf. There'd be what match of the day or whatever, or what was it on ITV?
Grandstand, do you know?
Grandstand, or what was it on World of Sport? Was that the thing that was on ITV? So the only thing you had left was BBC Two. Whatever movies were on. So I started watching all these old movies, and by the time I was about 7 or 8 years old, I could tell you who Billy Wilder was and what movies he directed. And I had a love of old sort of black and white films to be on the afternoons. I was sitting watching with my mum. And so that was something that developed from that age then, was this kind of getting this love of storytelling. And between that and watching, we used to be allowed to stay up on a Friday night, because on BBC Two they had also the double bill horror movies that have an old Universal monster movie. They'd be like Bride of Frankenstein or something, followed by a Hammer film.
Yeah.
and would always love the old Universal ones. In the Hammer film, you'd watch if you had the nerve. And the bill was rubbish. It'd be like Zoltan, Hound of Dracula, or stuff like that. Absolutely rubbish, but it would scare the crap out of me. But yeah, but watching old horror movies and stuff, and is that's the thing that sort of stuck with me for life. Then from them,
were your sisters involved in this kind of?
Oh no, see,
what were they doing?
Well, they were off doing their own things. You know, they were off with their own friends around the estate, and when they got older, they were off to the discos and things.
Yeah.
Whereas I tend to stay as a bit more of a homebody, and yeah, so it'd be that. So as I got a bit older, you know, Saturday nights they'd be off to either the sort of youth discos or the sneak in pretend you're 18 discos. And I'd be watching whatever movies were on the Saturday night, and I'm watching a lot of stuff. Like I remember as a kid watching like Serpico and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was complete disregard for age appropriate. Yeah. Yeah. So, and one of the things that I was reading as well at the same time, and there were certain book series that got me at that time. But one of the big things was that the cinema in our town closed down, I think around 1980. And we didn't have a car. We couldn't drive to any cinemas in other towns. Their VCR machines weren't the norm just yet, and we didn't have one until quite a few years till after they become normal. So the only way I could experience new movies a lot of the time was by reading novelizations.
So what were those novelizations then? What films were they of?
I mean, I still have some on my bookshelf here. I've got this is a great one actually. I'm going to reach up and get this. My trousers might fall down. Forgive me.
Poltergeist. How does that work as a novel?
It's brilliant. It's a really good novelization. James Caan, he did a lot of that stuff. He did I think he did he do Return of the Jedi as well? I've got a bunch of them up here, Star Wars and stuff. And
you got Jaws.
I do have Jaws, but Jaws was a novel before it was a movie, remember? But I've got there are authors like Alan Dean Foster and James Caan. They're doing a lot of these novelizations. Sometimes, very often, like the novelization of Star Wars, original Star Wars. You know, to put this in context, I became obsessed with Star Wars at the age of 6. And there was no way to see it again until it came on TV, and didn't come on TV, I think, till 1983. So there's something like 4 or 5 year gap between seeing Star Wars and cinema, which I absolutely became obsessed by, and actually getting a chance to see it again. And you know, I try to explain that to my kids now.
Yeah.
You're used to the sort of movies coming out even sometimes within a few weeks, or even day and date. And so the only way I got to experience these things again was through novelizations. And I read the novelization of Star Wars, which had George Lucas's name on the cover, but I think it was actually Alan Dean Foster who wrote it. I must have read that cover to cover 3-4 times a year for about 4 or 5 years, because that was the only way I could experience a lot of these movies. And stuff like got Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T.
Wow.
A bunch of these things I never got to see in the cinema, but I read the novelizations.
I mean, when you finally got round to watching these films, though, that you'd only read as novelization, you must have experienced that in a very different way than people who were just watching the film.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things about that time, though, is because novelizations then were a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, I don't even know if people do them anymore.
I think they do, but they're not to the same level as what they used to.
Yeah, again, for the same purpose, because people can access these movies anytime they want, whereas you're talking about the early 80s, you had to wait for a thing to come on TV or be released on video or whatever. Poltergeist, for example, there are whole sections of this book where you see what happened to the little girl on the other side. It has her whole experience of this kind of bizarre spirit realm.
Whoa.
That's obviously not in the film. They couldn't have filmed it, but it's in the novelization. And I don't know how much that is based on what was in the screenplay that wasn't filmed, that they couldn't film, or how much James Caan just made up. but you start to see it because very often the novelizations are based on screenplays before the movie was actually edited and put together and put out. I can the novelization of this again very often attention. The novelization of Star Wars, the one that has George Lucas's name on the front, has entire sections that were cut from the film, and you only got to see them then fairly recently as extras. Like there's the character of Biggs. If you know Star Wars, you know who Biggs is, but the only reason you would have known who Biggs was is because he appeared in the novelization, and it wasn't until years and years later that parts of that restored and sort of put out as extras on the Blu-rays and so on. So it was interesting to go back then see the movies and see all those parts that were missing, but it's also interesting to see what was possibly there in the movie that got sort of cut and got changed before it actually went to production, before it hit the cutting room floor.
You've got this, like, within you about being passionate about things. Where do you think that came from, though? That thing, because it doesn't sound like your dad was a very passionate man in that regard about liking something. Where does that come from, do you think?
As an adult, I suspect it's possibly being ADHD.
Yeah.
I've never been diagnosed, but as I've got older, I mean, I was never hyperactive or anything. I didn't have that aspect of it. But if things like hyper focus and becoming very focused on specific topics, and so when I was a kid, Star Wars was my entire universe. Pardon the pun. For a long time, and things like movies and I still have this thing now. If I get interested in something, it's not enough just to sort of consume it as a viewer or a reader. I have to know how it works.
Yeah.
I have to know what's behind it, which is why even as a kid, if I was watching movies, I was aware who directors were, who screenwriters were, who the composers were, doing the music and so on. And I would used to love watching making of documentaries because I wanted to know how the thing worked. How did that actually get made? That's something I've carried over as an adult. Very much, it's not just, you can see the guitars behind me. It's not just that I have guitars. I have to know how guitars work. I have to be able to build a guitar, and I have to know how the pickups in the guitar work. It's I can't just be interested in a thing. I have to really drill into it. And that kind of hyper focus thing is kind of an ADHD thing. As much as that sounds counterintuitive, that you're being very dedicated in your intention as opposed to losing your attention. When something grabs your interest, it grabs it completely and entirely. It's very hard to be casually interested in a thing.
When you're reading as a kid, then was you kind of focusing on not just the story in the book? It was, you were also wondering, well, how did they make this story? How did this story get written?
Yeah, well, the idea of being a writer was in my head from a very, very young age. Probably from the age of 6 or 7 or 8, and I started trying to write stories at that time, and I paid attention to the acknowledgements pages as a kid.
That's interesting.
So I knew what publishers were, I knew what they did, I knew there were things like editors and so on. So even as a kid, I had a sense so that there's an industry there that makes these books. And I had a notion that all through my childhood, I was going to write a novel and send it off to a publisher. And they say, "Oh, here's a check for thousands of pounds. Thanks very much." Yeah, I had an interest in it as a business, as an industry, and as a writer at the same time from a very young age. No, obviously, that sort of came and went through my life then as other interests sort of took over, and then I came back in my 30s, but I think that's a common thread for an awful lot of writers, that they kind of wander through life a bit, and writing is something and then arrives later on. I think it's one of those careers or pursuits you kind of need a few miles on the clock. You need a bit of life behind you to really tackle. I think that's why so many of us, and you look at so many authors' sort of biographies, well, and Mark would be the same, I think Doug to an extent as well. We've drifted from thing to thing over years before we finally sort of wash up as writers. And I think it can't be a coincidence that so many of us have that same kind of path to that's very kind of circuitous route to writing.
Yeah, I think you're completely right about that. I mean, I think because when people, find out how old I was when I first got published, they're always a bit surprised. But I think I had lived probably a bit of a more full life than most had done. I mean, I had my first kid when I was like 21, and all that type of thing. And it's that which isn't which is quite old round here, to be fair. But but yeah, I do agree. It's like it is there is a lot of people who I think would have the same kind of thing. But what has kind of marked out your life though is that creativity has been pretty much center of your life since you were a kid. Then because it's not just about books and film and all that type of thing. Music was also a huge influence in your life as well.
Yeah, and music. This is kind of another thing. I was saying, like, my dad didn't have much of an influence on things, but my dad was a country singer. He had a country band with him and his brothers, the Neville country band. He used to play the pubs and stuff. And it wasn't really until I was older I realized that was an influence. And there weren't really instruments around the house. We didn't have any instruments in the house. But my dad would always been singing and stuff. And I didn't take an interest in music myself until I went to secondary school, to grammar school. And the kid who sat next to me alphabetically in the class happened to walk the same way home that I walked home. But he was big into music. So that sort of started getting me to listen to music, and I started developing a taste in my own band. So I was interested in stuff. That in itself, again, that thing, well, as soon as I got interested in music, I have to know how that works.
Yeah.
So then I wanted to get a guitar so I could figure that out. And if there's any innate ability there, it probably comes through from my dad and his family, because they were all very musical. And so that became a pursuit. And again, it's not something I was particularly supported in. My mum did, but not my father. But it definitely can't not have been influenced by the fact that there's a musical sort of lineage there to begin with.
Do you feel like maybe you were trying to get his attention in some way, in a positive manner?
God, you did a psychology degree, didn't you?
I did, yeah. Sorry. Only because I know from personal experience, a lot of the things that I like come from me trying to get positive attention from my dad, who is a great guy. He's got lots of kids, and he wasn't always great at showing attention equally to everyone. So if you liked the same things as him, it was more you were more likely to get his attention in a positive way.
Yeah. In my case, I honestly don't know. It certainly wouldn't have been something I was conscious of. Honestly, not something that's actually crossed my mind until you said it just now.
Have I just sent you to therapy?
Yeah. Because for me, guitar was very, and the music that I liked was very much the antithesis of anything he liked. Because he is very much into country music, and I then kind of purposely disliked that. And I mean, in the 80s, I was very much into 70s rock. I was never sort of my time, as it were, because like in 1983, 84, 85, I was listening to Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and bands from 10, 15 years previously. And the Stones and the Beatles and that kind of stuff. But for me, that was always very much my thing. That's mine. That's not anybody else's. And the guitar as well. It was my thing. It wasn't something to share with anybody else. Because I mean, my dad didn't share anything with me, if that makes sense. I mean, one of the reasons I think we always think one of the reasons I never got into football, I never had any interest in that, but is that that's one of those things that fathers share with sons.
Yeah.
Like my brother-in-law's family, they're all Liverpool fans. That's something, and the rugby fans, that's something the dad has shared with the kids, and it's a generational thing. Whereas I never had that at home. So anything I got an interest in, it was mine and mine alone. It wasn't coming from anybody else. At least that's how I felt about it at the time. Looking back out on it, the fact that my dad was a musician and I was a musician, that's not a coincidence. So whether I want to admit it or not, obviously there's some kind of connection there.
Do you think the fact that you kind of lost your childhood friends, in that period of time before then as well, and you were spending a lot of time with your mum, and that was happening as well. That kind of, do you think that's had like an effect on you when you were getting older? That had a major effect on you as well, and how you viewed relationships?
I think I suffer quite a bit from social anxiety. I would get very nervous very often in social settings. And I would say the friendships I do make tend to be very close friendships. But they're not high, they're sort of higher in quality than they are in number, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm not a gregarious person. And that's caused me problems as a writer, where we're often thrown into social situations where you're kind of expected to interact with people that you don't know. And I find that incredibly difficult. And I'm fairly sure that comes from being kind of pulled from my social circle at an early age.
Yeah.
Now, when I went to there's also a thing that happened. You and I have talked about sort of class quite a lot, and our backgrounds and stuff. And I remember one of my earliest memories of going to the big school in town when I was taken from this sort of infant school to the big school in town. Two things happened in the first couple of days. One was the teacher, the primary 3 teacher. There was me and one other kid had come from smaller schools and from the States, and the teacher singling us out, saying, "Yeah, these kids from this data state, there's always trouble." And being told that when you're like 6 coming 7, it's kind of difficult. And the other thing that happened, we had a headmaster at this primary school. I'll not beat around the bush. He was a cunt. He was an absolute cunt. He was a horrible, horrible old man. And he was old enough that he taught my dad at the same school. And he came around, I was maybe the second or third day at the school. And he came around to see the new arrivals, and so he came up to me and said, "Yeah, you as stupid as your father was."
Oh, God.
And that kind of framed education for me from there on, but also the feeling of kind of being put in your place. Hey, that's where you're from.
Yeah.
And so that colored things as well. And because I was bright, I was streamed into the I was at the smart kids table. But the rest of the kids at that table were all from very middle class backgrounds. So I was never quite part of that. And the friends I made, I had friends in primary school and stuff at that school. And you get to go to their houses now and again, and they had nice houses. And they had cars in the driveway. And they went on holidays and stuff. And I remember being very conscious of that as a kid. And then carrying that, I went to they still had the 11 plus in Northern Ireland when I was that age. So there's still this sort of separation between secondary schools and grammar schools. And I passed my 11 plus and went to a grammar school called the Royal School in Armagh. And again, I mean, I did make friends there, it's very close friends there, but again, being very conscious of being from a different background from most of the people that were there. Most of the people that were there, it was an all boys school when I first started, and amalgamated with the girls' school later on. But most of the boys that were there in first year were either from the parents or sort of from the professions, or they were business people, or they were from the sort of wealthier sort of agricultural class, or wealthier farmers and so on. And again, going to that school and being very conscious of being from the background I was from versus the background they were from. That was always something that was there.
Mm.
And I might not have been able to articulate it at the time, but I can now, looking back, and see that feeling of always been just a bit out of place. And at the same time, I know if I'd gone to the secondary school, I would have been out of place there too. So there's always that feeling of it's one of the things they don't tell you about social mobility. I mean, I am from a very working class background, but I'm happy. I don't carry that as a badge the way a lot of people do. But I'm happy to say I've socially mobilized. I'll happily say I'm sort of middle class. I mean, we have a KitchenAid food mixer. That's that's how middle class we are now. We eat hummus. And, we're like, so we're sort of middle class now. But the thing about moving from a sort of working class background into sort of that middle class world, you'll always be a deserter to one and an interloper to the other.
Yeah.
You're never quite one. You're never fishing or foul,
Mm.
And that's something that I'm more conscious of, more able to articulate as I've gotten older. But an awful lot of the sort of social anxiety that I suffer from now, I think, stems from just being out of place as a kid.
You don't really feel like you fit in. It's like you don't fit in. That's been a feeling that you've had from a very young age. So even now, when you do fit in, you're amongst your people who are into the same things as you, or doing the same thing as you. You still kind of have that anxiety of kind of being not quite right.
Yeah, I saw that anxiety, and now it's one of the big things. I mean, becoming an author changed my life in so many positive ways, and as much as I might, like most authors, will bitch about things that haven't gone right or the things that haven't worked out as well as I wanted to, and so on. We all have those stories, but my life is immeasurably better now than it was before. One of the big things has kind of finding my tribe, as it were. Find the people I was supposed to be with all along. And it happens less now, but I remember one year going to Harrogate, the Theakston's Festival at Harrogate. And I was there on the Thursday. I was there a day early. And there was nobody there that I knew yet. And I remember going hide in my room and phoning my wife and saying, I'm going to get a flight home. I can't do this. And her telling me not to be stupid. You have to get on with this. This is your job. You have to go and do this. And forcing myself to go to the room and walking down to the bar and like doing one lap and then just walking back to my room again. Because I was always struggled to just be with people that I don't know. And any time I go to something, I'm always waiting for you to turn up or Mark to turn up or somebody that I know I can talk to. Otherwise I'll be floundering. And I found that I know, for example, we went the Capital Crime last year. I went to in London, having a terrible time at that because there was nobody else I knew there. Or none of the people that I knew well there. And I really was stuck. And I wound up just sitting in my hotel room, feeling miserable instead of going out and socializing with people. And it's just, but it's just something I have. It's something I'll always have, and I've learned to, for the most part, fake it, and fake being sociable. And I can do that, but sometimes it just doesn't quite work, and you have to just retreat.
Did you have a lot of friends in high school or not? Then did you have like a very small group and that was it?
Well, I had a small group of good friends. I was one of like. Actually, a TV show that kind of encapsulated well was The In-Betweeners.
Yeah.
The comedy series. We were my group of friends. It was a grammar school, and you tend to have the very academic kids, and the academic kids also happen to be the very religious kids. So they had Scripture Union. We also called them the Scripture Union kids. Or else you had the sporty kids, the ones that played rugby and all that stuff. And we were neither of those. We were just kind of this little group in between. And we were actually able to sort of move between all those different groups socially and sort of get on okay with them. But yeah, we had our own kind of little bubble. And as those little bubbles tend to do, we formed a band. But yeah, no, that was very much based around music and not necessarily listening to the same music, but having music as that sort of common interest was the thing that kind of held us together, I think.
What was the name of the band? Do you remember?
It was Riot Structure.
Riot Structure.
After the Mark Bolan song called Teen Riot Structure. We were going to be massive. I think we were actually only together for less than a year, probably.
Yeah.
But I'm not, this isn't hyperbole, I'm not exaggerating. We were absolutely 100% convinced that within 6 months, we would be like the biggest band in the world. Absolutely 100% convinced of this. And I'm still best mates with the guy who's a singer in that band. We don't see each other very much these days, just life getting in the way. But we were talking recently. We found he found some old tapes of us.
No.
And going back and listening, thinking, "Oh God, we thought we were good."
Oh, Stuart, I need to hear this.
Do you know what the thing is? We were one of the. I worked in a music shop for years and got to know lots of young bands that are doing their own stuff. And we made the single most common mistake young bands do is we didn't know what we were good at. See, we're pulling all these stuff. I wanted to be Joe Satriani and Steve Vai and Eddie Van Halen and all that stuff. The drummer wanted to be in U2, the bassist wanted to be Bob Dylan, and the singer wanted to be Iggy Pop. Okay. So a lot of our set was made up of covers of like Stooges and Velvet Underground and the Stones and all this sort of stuff. And this is around 1989. We didn't know at the time we were playing grunge.
Yeah.
But we didn't know that was what it was, and we didn't know enough at the time to actually figure out actually that's what we're good at. And doing that, we could have made something of it.
Well, you had two issues: is that you were playing the wrong stuff, and you weren't in Seattle in America.
Yeah,
you were in Armagh. I mean, not known for its grunge scene in the early 1990s, I imagine.
No, but oddly enough, and there's going off on tangent. Armagh has there's a generation of people from Armagh that have gone on to do very well in the arts in general.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to mention that. I mean, it is quite rich, isn't it, in that kind of vein?
Yeah, strangely, I mean, I'm not going to go off on this rant, but I was typical rant about how the arts aren't kind of given their due and seen as proper careers. But of my generation of people I knew around my hometown, and it's a little like population 15,000-20,000 market town in Northern Ireland. There are far more people from there of my age that I know that have grown up to work in the arts that have become doctors or lawyers. There's people like Dara Carville who created the Bay TV series. There's Brian Kirk who directed Game of Thrones and a bunch of TV stuff and movies. He directed that the last Chadwick Boseman movie. There's actors. There's a guy, the drummer in our band now runs a theater company. And there's I'm an author. There's Michael Hughes as an author, also as an actor as Michael Colgan. His brother Andy Hughes is a director. A girl went on to be a dance choreographer and so on. Just all these people have got these good careers in the arts. This little shitty town in the borderlands of Northern Ireland.
But where did the encouragement come from? Was it from the school? Did they have a kind of slant towards creativity, or was it? I don't ever see grammar schools like that. You see, so.
See, not in my school. Now I don't know what it's like now. Things have changed, I think, but certainly back then, within the Catholic Church maintained system, there was quite a lot of encouragement. There seemed to be, from looking now, saying much more encouragement to the arts, and all those names I rattled off were from that school system.
Yeah.
For me, from my school, the Royal School, the arts were like one step above kind of remedial classes. There were, if you're academic, you're golden. If you're sporty, you're golden. If you're into the arts, you just kind of fell through the cracks.
Nice.
Which I did education, so my education record is incredibly mediocre. My education is a whole sort of history of scraping through with the minimum effort, Yeah, there was certainly no encouragement for the arts at my school, and I mean, at home, once my mum knew that I was on this course and wasn't going to be deterred from it, she was very supportive. My dad at that stage had exited the scene.
Yeah.
And my mum was very supportive in my sort of late teens and my 20s and trying to steer me on the right path, actually making something I didn't make of it what I should have made of it. But she was supportive. But educationally, there was nothing. I tell a lie. There. I'm not giving due. My music teacher was very good at the Royal. Encouraged me a lot. But one thing happened that stuck with me for years and years and years was my English teacher. I think I must have been it's around GCSE age, 4th or 5th year, and we'd written a short story, and some weeks later, my English teacher asked me to stay behind. Mr. Jennings asked me to stay behind, and he told me that he'd taken my story to a conference and shared it with the other teachers at the conference, and it had gone down a storm. Everybody thought the story was great, and all through my life after that, when I had those moments of thinking, should I try and write? Am I wasting my time trying to write? I thought back to that, and that was the one thing that sort of gave me the sort of the barefaced cheek to try and write. Was that somebody when I was about 15 had said it was good?
But at that time, though, music was your first love.
It was. I mean, I had a very set career path in my head. I was going to be a rock star.
You were going to be a rock star.
I was going to be a rock star until I was too old to be a rock star, which in my head was about 35. And after that, I was going to be a writer. And so I wind up at the destination. It was just the journey. The journey didn't quite go as planned. You know, and I was serious about it as when I was younger, being a musician. I studied music at college, and no, I dropped out. I went to study at as it was then Salford College of Technology. It got absorbed into Salford University, and there was a separate arts campus on Adelphi Street in Salford. So I left home, moved to Manchester, and did a course called Popular Music and Recording was the title of the course. It was a diploma, and you had the option of doing a third year as a degree. And it was the first year they ran this course, and it was really one of the first courses of its kind in the UK. This was before, you know, the Paul McCartney's performing arts school and stuff. So it was the only course of its kind in the UK at that time, and it was absolutely shambolic. It was just dreadfully run, and I think there was something like 50 of us started in first year, and I think something like 5 people actually graduated with a diploma at the end of the second year. Huge number of dropouts just because it was being run by a handful of staff, but I think nobody really quite knew what they were doing. And I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to be a jazz course or a recording course, or, you know. But the thing is, I learned an awful lot there. I mean, I took guitar lessons there off and on. I didn't show up an awful lot of the time, but I was given lessons in sort of jazz theory and that sort of stuff, which then I was able to apply later on.
When did you get your first guitar?
One of my uncles, my Uncle Bob, he actually gave me a guitar when I was about 7 or 8.
Yeah.
That he had lying in the back of a wardrobe. And I tried learning at the time, and I couldn't quite get to grips with it. And it was when I was about 13 or 14, the music teacher at school decided to start a guitar club, which lasted about 2 weeks. But he gave us like a chord sheet, just a sheet of paper with chords on it. And I just took that and went with it. And was really self-taught from then on.
What just going back a little bit, what age was your dad no longer around? How old was he?
It was about 16 or 17.
Right. Did the house kind of change once he'd left? Did you know, like, or your older sisters must have been out the house by then as well, though? Was it just you and your mum left there then?
Yeah, by the time both my sisters had kids and got married very young. Like 18, 19, that sort of age. So the time I was 16, they were away. And that didn't help things because it was me and my dad then kind of couldn't avoid each other. and the relationship had really just broken down at that point. It was constant fighting, just, and then with my mom as well. It was just completely dysfunctional, completely. And it wasn't an easy time because I was just really ashamed of it. I was really ashamed of the idea. I mean, this is certainly back then, the idea of a family breaking apart felt like a really shameful thing in Northern Ireland at that time, you know. And yeah, it wasn't easy. And when it finally did fall apart and he left, it felt disastrous at the time, but it was actually the best thing that ever happened to us. So then it was just me and my mum then for a year or two until I went to university.
Well, that was going to be my next question: is how you actually did leave the house then when you went to university. You did,
yeah.
You did move out. Did you have any kind of feelings of maybe I'm just going to stick around though, because if I go, mum's on her own?
Not at that time. It was an odd situation because we'd been in this band with my mates, and basically I had to leave the band to go to college, and there was touching on whether I was going to go or not. I got the offer to get into the course, and I think I sort of dithered about whether I was actually going to do it or not until quite late in the day, and then finally took the plunge and went. And I didn't know at the time that the breakup of my parents' marriage left my mom basically penniless. Because they had a mortgage and stuff, and everything all of a sudden was on her plate, and she didn't have a big income. So she was trying to help my sisters along. They weren't in the best situations either. I was away at university. The nature of the course meant I didn't get a full grant. There was only a partial grant. So I didn't have enough to live on. So my mum had to transport me living in England, and including paying rent and getting food and all that sort of stuff. And I didn't find this out till after. She was living in one room in the house. This means a 3-bedroom council house, but she lived in one room. Yeah, had all her meals there, lived there because she could only afford to heat one room. And it was really later on that I realized how much she'd sacrificed at that time, and also what an ungrateful wee shit I was at the time. That I either obtusely ignored what was happening or just didn't realize whatever. But and my mom, again, was very supportive of the music. She I had my first decent guitar was a Squire Bolt. I still have it over there, it's in pieces. That came from like the KS catalog or something. And it was a decent enough guitar, but I wanted, because I was going to go to college, need something more professional, and I found a secondhand Charvel. And if people don't know guitar brands, Charvel or sort of not as well known as Fender or Gibson, but they're up there with that sort of quality. Found a second-hand one in a shop in Belfast for £290. And I have no idea how much, still to this day, how my mum paid for it. I assume she got it on finance of some sort of thing like that. And I was thinking back at the time, I was really ungrateful for it. I was a real shit about it. I kept asking for more, not realizing how much he was already sacrificing for me. So I think that's the thing I look back on now and kind of regret that I wasn't more conscious at the time of what my mum was sacrificing for me to be at college.
I think it also, it's easy to look back and think that way, but you're also dealing with a lot of the stuff that you'd already gone through. Is that you were always constantly seeking, a protection of some sort, of and it's probably not a case of you being ungrateful. It's just being scared of, of going back to a place you didn't want to go back to. It's like, if these things are happening, these good things are happening, then the bad things won't happen anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's human nature. You'll seek the sort of comfort of things, those kind of things that are good, and try to blot out things that are bad. I mean, I do know that going to college was a big deal. Getting out of Northern Ireland was a big deal. It was a thing. It still happens today. There's a kind of a brain drain particularly amongst anecdotally amongst the sort of the Protestant population of people just wanting to get out. People go off to university elsewhere rather than staying at university within Northern. There's a couple of really good universities in Northern Ireland, but people very often just go anyway because they want to get out. Certainly back then at the height of the Troubles, everybody just wanted to get out of there, and certainly anybody that was my age. And so it was a big deal for me just to get out and go to England, and also really eye-opening as well, seeing a completely different way of life, and it really changing my view of who I was and where I was from. Really fundamentally changing things. Like, for example, I mean, the idea of national identity, of considering myself Irish at that time when I was 18, going up through sort of a loyalist estate and into through a Protestant school. If you asked me my nationality, I probably would have said British rather than Irish. As a lot of people from my background would tend to do. But going to England in Manchester, and I was now Irish whether I wanted to be or not.
Yeah.
And so that changed things a lot for me, and changed seeing a society where people weren't divided along the lines that they had been at home. Now, of course, going to Manchester or a city like that, it's still a divided society, whether it's by class or by race or whatever. But it wasn't divided along sectarian lines the way it was at home.
Yeah.
And just seeing what life was like without all that shit. That was it was a really, really big thing for me at the time.
Do you think you were aware? You know, the Good Friday Agreement was signed when you were 25. So I mean, no, 27,
2026, yeah,
26. One of those years. Anyway, do you think you weren't really aware of what was going? You know, like of the magnitude of what you were living through until you left Northern Ireland?
I wasn't aware of how abnormal it was. You could put it that way. But certainly as a kid, you know, as a child, you watch the news and hearing news about killings and so on, people being shot or blown up or whatever. It just becomes part of the fabric of your day-to-day life. And there were big things that happened as a kid. I mean, I was born within a few days of Bloody Sunday. And there were big things sort of historically that happened, like the hunger strikes happened when in 1980, and I was about 9 years old. And that was an absolutely terrifying time. There was so much violence on the streets, and the threat of it. There's generally a feeling if you manage your own business, you'd be okay. You know, I wasn't going to join the army. I wasn't going to join a paramilitary group, so I should theoretically be okay. But I remember around that time being 8, 9 years old and seeing that those violence was on the streets and that this could come to my door. And kids being kids, rumors spread around. I remember this being a thing. I remember the morning Bobby Sands died. You know, Bobby Sands on hunger strike, it was like a ticking clock. We knew he was going to die, and rumors spread around our school that when he died, the IRA would come into the schools and start shooting kids.
Oh my God.
Which of course wasn't going to happen.
No.
As an adult, I know, you know, that was never going to happen. But that's the rumor that went around our school. And 8-year-olds, I fully believed that. And I remember getting up, I can't remember, was it a Monday morning? And being on the radio news that Bobby Sands had died overnight and begging my mum not to send us to school. Being terrified that something was going to happen. And that's the first time I remember actually being, well, it's not the first time, but one of the times I remember being actually really afraid as a child. Like another early memory is being in Port Russell, the seaside town, north coast of Antrim, for a holiday. Little seaside holiday, which we didn't do many of, but we got this one, and coincided with the IRA doing a bomb blitz in Portrush. I remember hiding under the bed, and again begging my parents, or us kids begging our parents to take us home, but we couldn't get home because a friend of the car brought us up and with no way of getting home. So we're stuck. And I remember my mum walking me the next day hold my hand walking the street behind where our little guest house was, and the fire brigade closing down a church that was on fire. So you have things like that, and they become part of your sort of day-to-day reality, and things like soldiers on the streets. I remember as a kid asking a soldier, could we look down the sights of his rifle? And I'm letting us do it. Then I was asking, could we shoot your rifle? At this point, the soldier had a bit of common sense and said no. But that became the norm, and things like being stopped and searched on the street by soldiers at gunpoint was just that happened. It happened. It was scary the first time it happened, but after that, it was just a thing that happened. So moving to England, all of a sudden realized how wrong and abnormal all that was really came into focus, and that's one of those really big fundamental changes for me. And bizarrely, but the strange thing is, once I was in England for a couple of years, lived in Manchester for a couple of years, I couldn't wait to go back. I wanted to go back to Northern Ireland, which I did. I dropped out at the end of the 2 years. Rather than going on to the third year and doing the degree, I just dropped out at that point because the course obviously wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. So I just went home with ambitions to try and make a career in music that I think at heart I maybe didn't actually want as much as I thought I wanted. But going home, and at that time, going into the early 90s, there was an uptick of loyalist violence, of loyalist paramilitaries just randomly shooting people who are in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that being a scary time, but also kind of mixing fairly freely with people from different sides of town. Because there was a generation, I've seen it very specific to my generation, where this wasn't our fight.
Right.
This was somebody else's fight, and we weren't bothered with it.
Yeah.
So particularly through music, because we're all playing in bands together, if you want to play in a band, you had to mix with people from the other side of town. Just pragmatically, there's no other way to do it. So that broke down an awful lot of barriers. And there's a great movie, if you ever get a chance to see it, it's called Good Vibrations. It's about a guy from Belfast called Terry Hooley, who opened a record shop in the middle of Belfast right at the start of the Troubles and managed to keep it open through the Troubles, but he discovered the undertones and bands like that. It was a big scene in the Belfast punk movement. So there's a movie about him called Good Vibrations, and it's the closest film I've ever seen to what my life was like during the Troubles. Because there were bands who were just mixing Protestant and Catholic together. And there's a specific scene in that movie where the army stopped a van of these guys going to play a gig, and they can't understand that there's a mix of Protestant Catholics in the band, because the only place they ever saw this in the country where people were actually freely mixing was within the music scene. And that was my experience of it. And things like that actually happened to us. We'd be stopped going to a gig. There'd be four of us 17-year-olds in a Peugeot 205 with a PA system and a drum kit and amps and guitars, like we'd be sitting in the back of the van, knees up around my chin, with an amplifier on my lap, that kind of thing. But being stopped by an army roadblock and being questioned, and them not quite understanding why we were different kids from different backgrounds all together going to do this thing. So yeah, I came back to Northern Ireland, but still that continued, that scene, and then the Good Friday Agreement came along and changed things again fundamentally, thankfully.
So you come back, you must have been what, 2021 when you went back to Northern Ireland. So this is like very early 90s. It says here about the list of jobs that you had. This is on the book series and all the website, the best websites in the world. I mean, just for example, this sentence is amazing. Born in 1972, Stuart Neville lives in a small town with his family and not in Belfast.
No.
The city that plays a central role in his thrillers, but just outside it. It's like not in Belfast. But it does go on to say he was a rock guitarist before he decided to become a writer. But when you look at him, he looks more like the guitarist he used to be than the author he is now. So it says, and that's not it. He used to be a composer, a teacher, a salesman, a film extra, a baker, and a hand double for a well-known Irish comedian. So let's go in order. Any of all of those true jobs that you had during your 20s?
Not in my 20s necessarily, maybe through my teens, but yeah, more or less. There might be some kind of slight massaging or stretching of truth in some of those.
When you came back to Northern Ireland, then what job did you get? Where was you working?
I wound up working in a music shop, in a guitar shop. It was a tiny little shop that we had in Armagh. And before I left for college, I'd been teaching guitar there. So I knew the owner, and I'd been on the dole for a few months, and he said, "Sure, come and work for me."
Yeah.
Which I did, and I stayed there nearly 10 years. I think maybe about 8 years I stayed there, just working in a music shop. And I kind of wound up very much in a rut through my 20s, because a lot of my friends, when I went to university, they hadn't maybe bothered that much with school, so they started going to doing their A levels when I was off trying to do a degree. So they all went to university.
Yeah.
When I came back, and they're sort of getting on with their lives, and I kind of wound up very much stuck in place, because the job in the music shop didn't pay enough to really make any kind of a life for myself. But it was a job and it was an income. And I think I look back on this now, I think I had this idea in my head that I was still going to be a rock star somehow, but with zero effort on my part. I think I had this notion that I'd be playing guitar at home someday, and David Coverdale would be walking down the street and hear my lightning fast shredding through the window. I come knock up on the door and say, "Come here, I want you to come and join Whitesnake." I seem to think that was somehow going to happen. And I look back on it now, and I think, as much as I wanted to be a musician professionally, whether I was a session musician or whatever, I didn't want it enough to actually make it happen. Because the people that I knew at college who went on to be professional musicians, they went to London and they roughed it.
Yeah.
And they took all the crap that goes with that until they got there. Now, there's only really a handful of those people I knew at college actually are, to my knowledge, working musicians now, that's their primary income. But in order to do that, they had to sacrifice an awful lot, which obviously I just wasn't prepared to do. I mean, there's two of the musicians I knew back then. One of them was a guy called Neil Fairclough, who's a bassist. The most astonishing bassist you ever heard in your life. Just incredible, phenomenal, like breathtakingly good. And he now plays for Queen. He's Queen's touring bassist. And that's always struck me that he had to be just amongst the single best bassists possibly I've ever heard in my life. He had to be that good to stand and go dum 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 dum. That's his job, Another guy called Mike Gorman, who's a jazz pianist and just an incredible all-round musician. And he's played for Boy George. I think his most regular gig is Kick Through on the Coconuts. And there were people who went on to make those careers, but they had to do the hard stuff that I wasn't prepared to do. I was just too comfortable staying at home and doing a little job in a music shop and putting strings on people's guitars and things. Now, I did try at that time to get into writing music for film.
Yeah.
Which is where the composer bit comes from. I did make some headway in that. I did a score for one micro budget feature and did a couple of radio jingles and some stuff for theatre. Because I amassed I gathered some very basic recording gear at the time. Very, very rudimentary now. But that taught me enough to know that the film business is a horrible business and I didn't want to be part of it. As much as I love cinema, those few dalliances I had as a composer were enough to go, no, that's, I mean, as much as we authors like to complain about the publishing business, how hard it can be, the film and TV business is absolutely brutal. Absolutely brutal.
Definitely. No, I agree with that. The very few times I've kind of bumped up against that industry, it ain't a fun place to be. I remember talking to the guy who was developing my first two novels for TV, who'd been a writer in TV for decades. And I was like, "So what's the chances of this?" And he was like, "I have absolutely no idea. TV changes every day. I've been working for 30 years. I could be out of a job tomorrow and never work again. I've got friends that's happened with." And I'm like, well, that wouldn't happen as much in the publishing industry, really. If you've got a bit of talent, it's generally you will still be able to make a living or half a living.
Like if I sign a contract to write a book, and I write the book, you're fairly confident it's going to get published.
Yeah.
Unless something really terrible happens. I mean, which does happen now and again, but for the most part, generally you're fairly sure. I've signed that line. They've given me an advance check. I've written the book. That book will see the light of day.
Yeah.
TV and film's not like that.
No.
And the number of people, like screenwriters I've spoken to, who've maybe made a living 10, 15 years in Hollywood, never had a single thing produced. And they find it just really crushing. They actually wind up moving into publishing instead.
I mean, the amount of money that was spent on just developing my first two, like we went from the first one to the second one, the amount of money that was spent on that without it ever seeing the light of day is astonishing to me, because I always feel like at some point there's too much invested to not do it. It's like, but it is incredible. Like, so were you in bands as well at this time though, when you were working in the music shop?
It was an odd thing at that time because I had the odd rehearsal, did a odd stand-in gig for somebody, that kind of thing now and again. But I had gotten really fed up with the sort of the politics of being in a band. I mean, the personal politics of being in a band, all the faff, and for that 1 hour on stage, the 12 hours you have to do rehearsing and driving and arguing and fighting just to get that 1 hour on stage. And there weren't the people around at the time to form a band to do original material. I used to get asked all the time to form cover bands and things to play at the pubs, but working in a music shop, I used to see those guys that were on that circuit coming in and out, and I knew that I did not want that life. Again, it's a really brutal thing. These guys you come in on a Monday to get their packet of strings, whatever, get new cones in their speakers, whatever, and they tell you they've done a gig on the Saturday night in the pub, and at the end of the night, the landlord had said, "Oh, didn't get enough people in tonight. I'm going to pay you half," and then having to swallow that. And just the disrespect and disregard there was for their craft from the people who were supposed to be paying them, and the audiences. And I knew I just didn't want to be part of that. So the other option was to either try and make it as a composer or session work, but again, I was in Armagh. I wasn't in London. I wasn't in New York. So, unless I actually moved to those places and really dedicated myself to it, I was never going to make a go of that either. So although I learned an awful lot in those years. I learned an awful lot about guitar repair and stuff, which stood me in good stead. And just kind of learn on my feet because I had to. But yeah, I kind of regard those as kind of wilderness years of just spinning my tires, not going anywhere, not doing anything, just in stasis. You
didn't miss anything not doing the pub circuits, I can tell you that now, because I did that.
Yeah.
And I still have PTSD from that. It is not a fun thing to do for very, very little money.
Yeah.
And I have had those moments where we only had 4 people in, so we're not going to pay you what we're supposed to pay you, and you're only going to pay me like 50 quid anyway. And it's like, it's not, you can't live on that anyway. But you didn't miss out on anything. So if you were working in the music shop for like 10 years, it takes us up to around about 2001, 2002, maybe.
Well, it was 1999. Actually, I accidentally formed a web design business.
Okay, so because I was going to say there's a 10-year gap before the 12 comes out.
Yeah.
What was going on in that time?
I really honestly just stumbled and fumbled my way into a business. What happened was I was still trying to get work as a composer for film, and I'd got my first modem, an internet connection a year or two beforehand, like an old dial-up modem that sort of did the R2D2 beeps to get you online. You had to unplug the phone and plug this in instead. But again, that part of my brain that goes, "Oh, that's interesting. How does that work?" As soon as I got an internet connection and saw how websites operated, I said, I have to figure out how that works. How do you do that? Why when I click on that, does that take me to another page? So I figured out how I got books and figured out how to make a website. And I thought, all right, what I'll do is I'll make a website for my business as a composer. And I put it online. And a friend of mine at the time had a recording studio, so he decided he'd build a website for his recording studio and was sort of compare notes. And then a guy who was sort of vaguely new came to us, who had a a copy shop came to us and said, "Hey, would you make me a website?" So we did. And he wrote us a check, and we kind of thought, what do we do with this? And so we opened a bank account, and then we had a business. And that kind of just sort of took off very quickly. And at that time, you're talking about the 99, 2000, it was really like the Wild West for web design businesses. And there's so many companies sprung up because people realized making a website back then was a piece of piss. There was absolutely nothing to it. It was the easiest thing in the world. So all these sort of companies like ours were sprung up. Now, we made a point then of actually getting good at it. Learned how to properly code and stuff. We actually started doing some fairly heavy web applications and so on. Including a system for the governing body of 3-day eventing in Ireland, the Olympic sport, to do competition entries and do scoring in the field and upload them live to their website and this sort of stuff. It got that advanced. But it got to sort of in around 2007, and I realized I wasn't happy in that business. It was good that it got me out of my rut and got me doing something. But there was a lot of stuff came along at once. So it was I was growing jaded with that business, but also personal stuff. I'd been in a relationship that kind of had a messy end. And just a lot of personal crap went on at the same time. And it left me at one of those points where I thought, right, what do I do now? What do I do with my life? It was at that point, it would have been early to mid 30s. I had no money to speak of. I had at least had a house of my own. I had my own house, at least at that point. That was the only thing I had. A few guitars, but I had no money, I had no prospects, I had really nothing in front of me. But all that time I'd been writing off and on over the years, just doing a chapter here, a short story there, that kind of thing. But always realizing it was actually quite hard work. So I never really persevered with it, but I knew I was good at it. So it reached the point where I just kind of hit that crossroads and thought, what do I do now? And it was really kind of one of those moments where you kind of hit rock bottom. And you either swim or you drown, you know. And for me, swimming was starting to write and doing it seriously. And I wrote something like 3 novels over the course of a couple of years.
Wow.
And the first 2 of which were absolute shite. But the third one was the novel Wikipedia knows me for. 12, or as it's known in the United States, The Ghost of Belfast. So I wrote that book in 2007. And I got a publishing deal, so on an agent within about a year of that.
How did you go about getting an agent? I mean, did you know what you were? Because I know who your agent was, and I know how he kind of does get his authors is through short stories.
Yeah.
So were you writing short stories, and that's how he found you, or were you a little bit more, direct than that?
Well, see, I'd written, as it was called at the time, Followers. The book was called. I'd written that in 2007, and I'd made a couple of friends online who were writing, and we were critiquing each other's work and so on. And I polished the book up till it was pretty good, but I just didn't kind of know what to do with it. It wasn't quite horror, it wasn't quite a thriller, and I wasn't sure what it was. I queried a couple of agents, but kind of half-heartedly. But I was writing short stories as well, and I'd written a short story that I sold to an online magazine. And I got this email a couple of weeks after the story was published online from Nat Sobel, asking did I have a novel he could see. And so I sent that novel, and we passed it back and forth over a couple of months and sort of doing a bit of nip and tuck on it, improving it. And he took me on and got me a publishing deal. And it still it shocks me that it was he approached me rather than the other way around, but that's his way of working. And he changed my life. It's and the dedication on my second book, Collusion, is for Nat Sobel, who changed my life, and it's absolutely 100% true.
I remember my experience with Nat being a little different than yours. I think Nat knows his stuff. He doesn't know his stuff, and I think he was quite right in the email that he sent me after I sent him the first 50 pages of my book. And I wasn't prepared to listen to it at that point, and I didn't actually, extend that situation. But I may have done exactly what you've done if it had been thinking a bit more clearly. But you obviously had to do more work on the book before it got to being published. At what point did you think,
I'm prepared to do the work to get this career going.
Well, for me, the hard part was just getting the first draft done. And it's still for me to this day is getting the first draft done is the hard part. I actually really enjoy the editing process and the revision process. And Nat is one of those agents who's very hands-on, and he wants to get stuck into the manuscript and sort of pull it apart and put it back together again with the author. And I think it's just one of those cases where he and I work well together, in that he likes to critique and I like to get critique. I like getting that input and seeing how to shape the book. I mean, my first drafts tend to be pretty clean. You're usually fairly presentable as they are, but I find it a struggle to get there, to get to that first draft. But once I've got there, I really enjoy getting input and seeing this kind of slightly lumping, jagged kind of thing take shape into the book that it's going to be. I enjoy that part of the process. I know an awful lot of authors don't. And I've spoken to authors who have worked with Nat and couldn't stand it because they didn't like that editing stage. And that's fine. Different authors work in different ways. You can ask 100 authors how they write and you'll get 100 different answers. It just so happens that my working method sort of intersects with Nat's working method.
So 2009, the 12 comes out.
Yeah.
Or The Ghosts of Belfast. I think it was nominated for several awards.
Yeah, it made kind of a splash at the time. More so initially in the States, I think. It was called, the actual proper title of the book was always The Ghosts of Belfast. That was the first thing. I kind of had a run of bad luck with British publishers in that the editor who bought the book was let go about a month before the book came out. Now he stayed on as kind of an editor at large, but I didn't have a editor in the publishing house sort of fighting my corner that I needed. But the book had gone down really well within the publisher when they passed around proofs and stuff. And there was quite a bit of buzz about it sort of before it even came out. And I got some really good blurbs. James Elroy, and who happened to be a hero of mine, and John Connolly. Likewise, it's somebody very much admired. So I got off to a really good start with that book. And my American publisher, in America, it was odd because I can kind of talk about this now, years after the fact, but in America, it did the rounds of all the major publishers in the States, like Knopf and people like that. And I kept getting the same rejection back via Nat, was that we love this book. This book's great. We don't know what to do with it. They didn't know what to do with it being kind of a blending of supernatural and thriller. But also the other note that kept coming back was it's too literary to be a thriller. It's too thrilling to be literary. So just nobody seemed to quite know what to do with it. And it wound up with they were much smaller at that time, a publisher called Soho Press. A New York woman called Laura Hruska ran this. She was a lawyer through her career, and she, in retirement, set up this publishing house. And they operated like basically one room in a building in off Broadway in New York. And what they were really good at was finding books that would appeal to a very specific group of readers and getting that book into their hands. So the book did really well amongst that very dedicated crime readership, and was really liked by the bookstores, the booksellers. So they really went to town hand selling it. And over those first couple of books, like Barnes and Noble weren't really interested, the big retailers weren't interested, but it was the independent bookstores in the States that really got behind it and hand sold it. The point where it had quite a few reprints in its first run, and then wound up in the sort of award circuits and getting the LA Times Book Prize. So it really did. It exceeded expectations, certainly in the States, and it did better in the UK than I think the publisher thought it was going to. And it was helped by getting really, really good reviews the week it came out in the UK. So it made a much bigger impact than I think people were expecting at the time. Which is good because it gave me a career.
I don't mean, did you know pretty quick after that then that this was going to become a full-time job at that point then?
Yeah, I mean, because I was working on the second book then. I think I'd completed the second book by the time the first book came out, but it was a bit of a struggle trying to balance because I was running a business.
Yeah.
I think it would have been different if I'd been in a part-time, in a regular 9 to 5 job, where you finish your job at 5 o'clock and you come home and that's gone. But when you're running a business, you're never really off the clock. And trying to do that and write at the same time became really, really, really difficult. And at the same time, that my day job wasn't making an awful lot of money. Like most small businesses, is kind of hand to mouth all the time. Wound up that my writing was supporting my day job, rather than my day job supporting my writing. So it wasn't a difficult decision then to leave the business. Basically, I just handed my half of the business over to my business partner and said, away you go. I mean, not quite as brusquely as that we did discuss it and figure it out, but yeah, I just basically was able to step away from the business and look to writing full time. And I think it would have been more difficult had I had a career as such to walk away from. I didn't have any kids at the time, so I didn't have any dependents, so it wasn't as risky a move as it maybe seemed. Yeah, and I was used to living a kind of precarious existence anyway, having been self-employed for a good number of years before that anyway.
So, one of the things that we've talked about, a lot in the past is about this business and, how difficult it can be at certain points. You've got this great opening to the career, like the 12 or / Ghost of Belfast has been, really successful, and you go on to write, Collusion and I think Stolen Souls, the third one.
The third one, yeah.
And then you go on, you do Ratlines and moving forward, and you did the Serena Flanagan books. But then, is it around 2016, 2017 that the Halen Beck novels kind of come along?
Yeah. God. Yeah, that was an odd time because I think I was getting impatient with how the books are going under my own name.
Yeah.
And I had this idea, I think it was in early 2015. I had just one of those kind of lightning bolt ideas. For the crux of that book is a woman traveling in the States in Arizona and is pulled over by a sheriff and is arrested, separated from her children. And back in the holding cell in the sheriff's station, she keeps asking, where are my children? I don't have anything you want me to do, where are my children? And the sheriff goes, what children? And it was that line, that whole sort of premise of the book. Just the book then kind of just sprang fully formed into my head, start to finish. And but the problem was I was impatient with how things were going with books under my own name. This is before Those We Left Behind came out. Was on Richard and Judy and stuff. And I wanted a bestseller, basically. I wanted a bestseller. I got impatient. And another further problem was that the book at that time wasn't right for Soho Press. Soho Press had carved out their own kind of part of the market, which they're brilliant at. Were brilliant at selling, still are, but they've expanded since then. But at that time, this just wasn't a book for them. But they've been so good to me over the years and done so well for me. I didn't want to appear to be leaving them, which I wasn't. So my idea was that I'd write this book and another under the pen name of Halen Beck, but continue as Stuart Neville with my Irish set books. So that was really the reason for the pen name, was that I didn't want to be seen to be leaving my publisher in the States and so on, and but also because the book was set in the States and was a different kind of book. It just everything came together. It seemed like a good idea to go the pen name route. In retrospect, I wouldn't do it again. I know it's worked for a lot of authors. It's worked for Steve Mosby as Alex North, and so on. But for me, it didn't work. In retrospect, and if I had it to do again, I wouldn't do the pen name thing.
It was a like you went to, I think it was Crown and that type of thing in America. It was a big deal. It was big splashy thing. How much did that experience though have an effect on your writing? Because I know you slowed down quite considerably. You wrote a book that you kind of scrapped, and
Yeah.
it kind of did have an effect. How much did that experience, kind of, was there any moments where you were like, I can't carry on with this?
That was an odd kind of few years, to be honest. I can't say I regret it. I can't say I regret those couple of books, because I'm still very proud of those books, the 2 books that were published this Healing Back.
I mean, they are excellent books. We should say that. I should say
thank
that.
you.
They are excellent books.
And I think I remember the time. I remember, I think, digressing the story about how I was on holiday at the time. The family were on holiday at the time in Salou. Just typical Spanish hotel with a pool and screaming kids and stuff. And I knew Nat was going out on submission with this book, and what Nat would tend to do was go to a couple of publishers that he likes first before going on general submission with it. And I got a phone call on holiday from Nat, and it says, right, we've got an offer from Crown for 1 book for X amount of money. And it was enough money. It was a substantial amount of money, I'll be honest. And I remember being kind of shocked and thinking, fantastic, and Nat saying, but I'm going to turn them down. And I remember saying to Nat at the time, if my mother knew I'd been offered that amount of money and said no, she would slap me. She would slap me. And Nat goes, no, but I want a 2-book deal. It has to be a 2-book deal. Oh, we're not doing it. So he went away, and in between times, my little boy had been in the kiddies disco and managed to fall and split his head. Like blood everywhere, really dramatic. It wasn't as bad as it, but it was like a big thing. And Nat phoning me back, and me like covered in blood. And Nat going, Stuart, so they've done a 2-book deal for this amount of money, like an eye-watering amount of money. And me going, now that's great, but I have to call you back because I'm busy hanging up on him. But I remember, being really kind of floored by that. And my UK publisher, it stayed with Horrible Second in the UK, and they offered a good amount of money as well. And it went very quickly to auction in France and Germany, and it was a substantial deal. The whole thing was, and I remember just hubris taking over. And thinking at the time, okay, this is it. This is my golden ticket. This is the big book with 2 capital B's. I'm sorted. There's no way this can fail. And it got optioned very quickly for film. It the pre-orders or the sell-in and so on in the States was really, really big. And just being absolutely 100% confident, almost as confident as I was that I was going to be a rock star when I was 17. I was 100% confident this book will take off. This is the next Gone Girl. I'm sorted. I meant it. And then it all just kind of fell apart. Crime were going through changes at the time. They started to transition to being a non-fiction publisher. So the book just came out with no support. Even though that spurs a big amount of money on it, they just threw the book out there. No support in the States whatsoever. In the UK, my editor left that I was working at the time. A different editor came along. Just the book fell off the radar. It had been getting a huge push within the company until that time. And then, like, really 2-3 months before publication, just it all fell away. And the book did okay. For this Here and Gone, the first Healing Back book, it did okay. It got to like something number 16 in the UK charts and stuff. It sold reasonably well in the States. But for the amount of money that was paid for it, okay, it wasn't good enough. And then the second book, and then that really affected me, through my confidence a huge amount while I was in the process of writing the second Healing Back book. In fact, I've been writing the next Stuart Neville book, and it wasn't working. I said, I went to both points, like, can I write the second Healing Back book instead? And I was writing that when the first Healing Back book essentially tanked. It's maybe an exaggeration, but in the scale
in relation
things
to relation to things,
and it really just pulled the rug out from under me. It really just floored me. And shook my confidence in what I was writing and so on. And I did finish that book, the second Hale and Beck book. But back and forth with editors and so on, and just never quite, nobody was ever quite happy with it. And I wasn't happy with it. And certainly there were some arguments with my UK editor about the shape you're taking. I ended up saying, like, fuck it, I'm just going to write a different book. So I had an idea for another book, which became Lost You, which is a book I'm still really proud of. I really like that book. And but by that stage, my editor at Crown had been sacked. Another editor come in. Crown were very clear that they just weren't going to bother with this book at all. They didn't even publish it in paperback. And things had broken down fairly badly with my UK publisher at this stage. And I knew months even before the book came out that it was just going to die on the vine. It was just, it was going to do nothing. And it was heartbreaking. I'll be honest with you, it was absolutely heartbreaking because I'd been so excited for the first book and so sure that I could not fail. Just could not fail. So positive that. And then the second book, setting aside the one that I scrapped, but Lost You, I put so much into that book. I wrote it quickly. I put everything into it. It was one of those books that you write in like a blind fury. And I was so proud of it. And there are moments in that book that I'm still proud of, and bits of the writing and so on. And for it just to, I'll go no other way, but for the publisher just to piss it up against the wall, just completely broke me. I was just completely devastated. I think we talked to my wife about that time, even though I didn't really discuss it much sort of openly, whether she knew I wasn't in a good place at that time. And I think like this is my career done. And what kind of made it worse was that the books on my own name had been on an upward trajectory. And I'd, in between times, the book called Those We Left Behind, I've been selected for Richard and Judy. It had done really well, like into the 6 figures of sales. And any momentum I had with that was completely destroyed as well, because I'd taken this diversion with the Hale and Beck thing. So everything just fell apart. I felt like my career was over. And to be honest, even now, I still feel like I'm kind of trying to rebuild it since then. So that was really honestly devastating. Really, it took its toll on me, mentally and physically and everything.
I know that you won't want to, and I know you wouldn't want to badmouth anyone involved in it. Do you feel like you got the support that you needed from publishers at all during this process, or did you feel like you were kind of left to deal with this kind of disappointment on your own?
Yeah, I was very much on my own. And there are different things, like different editors leaving, different editors coming on board, then going, leaving again. There was no sense of continuity with them, apart from Soho Press, who had nothing to do with the Hale and Beck stuff, and they stuck by. And this, I'll be forever grateful to Soho Press. I'll say this out loud. I love that publisher with all my heart, and I love my editor there, Juliet Graham's, and my publisher Bronwyn Ruska, and the marketing maven, as he's known, Paul Oliver, Juliet's husband, who all worked there, and they all stuck by me through all this. They were there for me. They never, even though I'd gone off and done this other stuff with another publisher, and chased the money, they stuck by me. And it's actually a wee bit emotional here. They've still stuck by me to now. And I love them for that. I always will love them for that. But Crown basically cast me aside. There's no way to describe it. My UK publisher, just different editors came on board, and just, although I'd had a lot of support there up till then, it just kind of fell away. And the problem is, this is my career. I have no plan B. And there's a thing, I don't know how cognizant necessarily editors are of this when they deal with authors. When you talk to your editor, whoever it might be, whichever publisher it might be, you're just one of many authors with a book, and just one of many things that needs that editor's attention in that day. But for the author, this is how I'm feeding my kids for the next 2 years. And I think that's a problem that publishing, sometimes the industry doesn't deal with terribly well, is that disparity between what this means to the publisher and what it means to the author.
Yeah.
And it's not always about money. It's not how much the advance was paid. It's how much do I feel like I have a future? Do I feel like 2 years from now I still have a career? And you know, in 2016, 2017, I was very confident I had a career. Now in 2023, I'm still hanging on, but I don't have that feeling of security beneath me. And the only thing that sort of gives me any kind of comfort in that is not many jobs really do have that much security anymore these days. But yeah, that whole episode, I was self-inflicted. Nobody made me go off and do a pen name and do all that stuff, but it was yeah. I mean obviously I should mention I didn't mention, I should mention Nat and Judith at Sobel Weber and Caspian Dennis at Abnerstein in the UK. They all stuck by me. They all fought my corner. They all did everything they could for me. And still now we're doing that. They're still fighting for me. And again, without them, I would have just fallen off the edge of the business and not recovered, you know.
Did you ever get really close to just thinking, I can't write another book? Did you ever get close to that kind of thought process at all?
Yeah, I mean, I was very close to thinking, do I have the will? Do I have the ability to keep going, to keep writing? And it's only for the fact that, again, like I said, there's no plan B. I don't have a fallback career. There's no day job to turn to. I think if I'd had another career, if I'd been doing writing as a side thing to a main job, writing would have had to give way at that point. But because it's the only career I have no choice but to stick at it. And you know, thankfully, I mean, the good thing about the Hale and Beck stuff was it provided me with enough of financial cushion that I could survive those few years of kind of everything falling apart. And again, that's thanks to my agent for not for kind of fighting out the 2-book deal and stuff that I actually have that. But yeah, it certainly left me scarred, and sort of my physical health took a very bad turn over those few years. Well, I mean, I have to say my mental health wasn't good. It kind of hit kind of around 2019, when it was clear that Lost You, that book was going to fizzle and do nothing. I think that was the point where I just hit a wall really, and I remember one day I trying to get my kids to school, trying to get us to school, not being able to get a parking space, and having a panic attack. Like literally just sitting in my car shaking. I got the kids to school and I drove away from there to a shopping centre car park. And sitting in my car shaking. And I go, I was like, I was just like, just absolute terror and panic. And gradually over maybe a half an hour recovering from that and thinking, right, I have to do something now. I have to tackle this. I can't go on like this, and winding up in counselling. And that kind of saved me and sort of got me back. And you spend an awful lot of time talking with the counsellor just about my job and writing and what it takes to get it done. And kind of coming out the other side of that and getting another publishing deal, getting House of Ashes out there, which unfortunately then again my run of luck coincided with COVID and lockdown at a point when publishers didn't really know what to do. It was the very early stages of lockdown, and nobody really knew what was going to happen. And it was Catherine Armstrong bought House of Ashes at Bonnier, and she moved on before the book came out. But again, Bonnier did support me as best they could. I think in a very inhospitable environment as it was. Those were a couple of years, and then I've now since followed Catherine to Simon & Schuster with the new book.
I mean, I've said this to you privately, and you know, we've had conversations obviously over the years, because all of this, of course, coincided with us forming the Fun Loving Crime Writers.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I would like to know. I would like to believe has helped you in a lot of ways in this period of time, because it did, you know, that was literally the same amount at that time when it was Hale and Beck was
was being published was our first gigs. And I do hope that, like, you know, the last few years, having that kind of, you know, very close knit kind of group behind you who were, you know, willing to listen and commiserate and help, you know, is kind of aided in some way to get you through this, because I know it's been the same for all of us. We can kind of all have the same idea. But I remember speaking to you prior about this, is like the idea of you not writing. I get afraid when people like you tell me that, you know, like that they're struggling, because going back to, you know, when you were talking about going to Harrogate, the first time I went to Harrogate was the first time I ever spoke to you, and you were on a pedestal for me then, and you still are in a lot of ways as a writer on a pedestal to me, because I think you're just an incredible writer. The idea that you couldn't survive this business frightens the shit out of me. So it's like, so when you were talking in those ways, I was scared, because I was so upset about the idea of, like, you know, a business like this losing a talent like yours, and it does happen. So when in the last, like, year or so, when, you know, you've written your next book, and you know, you've got, you know, you're moving publisher, and I'm excited for you. I'm excited for the future, because I can't imagine one that doesn't see you being back on that pedestal again.
You're being far too kind. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the band, I mean, I should say my wife, Jo, helped me and encouraged me and sort of talked through so much stuff with me through that time. And just my kids, as well as my kids being there.
Yeah.
As support, but also as a reason to keep pushing. But the band then meant there's always something to look forward to. There's always something ahead that was good. There was always the next gig.
Yeah.
Whether that be Glenrothes or Glastonbury, you know. There was always something on the horizon that was there for me. And that camaraderie, and, you know, your support and the band supports, you know, the many hours you and I have spent at 2 a.m. in a hotel somewhere giving off about this, that, or the other. But also from a purely practical sense, the band kept my name visible.
Yeah.
Over a few years when it wouldn't have been otherwise.
Yeah.
Which is actually, you know, from a pragmatic point of view, is really good. But yeah, just there are those different branches of support that I had through that time that I'm very grateful for. It's family or friends, the band, whatever, you know, it all gets you through. To stage around now where I'm cautiously optimistic again about where things are going.
It's amazing to think that 30 odd years on from that band you were in Armagh, where you thought you were going to make it within 6 months, 30 odd years later, you're playing Glastonbury with a bunch of writers.
Yeah. I never thought I'd gig again. I mean, the last gig I'd done has been part of an acoustic duo with a singer-songwriter, Colleen Armstrong, and that was around 2008, 2009, around the time of the first book coming out, actually. She's in my second book. I mention her in my second book and said that our guitarist wasn't too bad. But yeah, but that's, you know, again, life moves on. She started a family and stuff, so that kind of fell by the wayside. So I also never thought I'd gig again, and the guitars were kind of ornamental, were toys, and they still are. They're still toys, still big boys' toys. I still spend far too much money and far too much time on them. But the idea of actually gigging, doing proper gigs to proper audiences and enjoying the experience, and it not being fraught with all the hassles that normally come with being in a band, has been such a I don't want to come across as too lovey here, but it has been just an absolute joy from start to finish. I mean, it's not always been an entirely smooth ride with the band. There have been wee moments here and there, but for the most part, it's been just nothing but a pleasure.
Compared to like normal bands, mate.
Yeah,
it's 99%. And then every now and again, Luca goes a bit full scouse on backstage people in certain countries.
Well, like the worst of our troubles in the band have been maybe not getting the right amp.
Yeah.
or like our last gig, getting an amp with no speakers in it.
Yeah.
It's been that kind of thing. It's not been having to drive 3 hours in the back of a Peugeot 205 in the middle of winter to get to a gig. Like, I remember doing gigs when I was 17, 18, where the drummer had to sit. The pub was so small that we're playing in that the drummer had to sit in his cupboard with his arms and legs sticking out so he could reach the drums.
And to be fair, that's only happened to us once when I wasn't technically on the stage while we were playing.
That's right. And it's as bands go, it's been such an easy ride, because we all the gear's hard and everything, so we just show up, sound check and play. It's an absolute pleasure.
There's no kind of, I mean, there's still ego, obviously, because just it is when you're going to perform, but not in the sense of, no, that's mine, like, it's like, we've got to do this because that's mine, or, it's like, it's not that kind of way. It's like, I've written a song and now you all have to play it in the same way that I'm imagining it in my head, because we're not doing that either. We've all kind of accepted our roles within the band. It's like, we've all kind of just accepted that we, like, this is the fun part of life, like, this is, and I think that's the best thing about it is writing, as we've discussed, can be very up and down as a career, and it can be out of nowhere. You can get blindsided by disappointments and failures and things like that. With this, it kind of it keeps me sane. It keeps me going, and I know it does the same for you as well. And I think it happens for even Val, who's been around for almost 40 years, can still be affected by things in the writing industry. And I think even she goes like, I can rely on this though to be fun and to be a good part of my life. We're incredibly lucky. We are incredibly lucky to have it. And I think it's good to hear from yourself, like, especially from people who are listening in, that, there are still, even, 10 years into your career, you can still have, like, those moments. But I think it's all about how you fight back from those moments. And I think that's what you're doing. And I commend you for it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the band has been the one constant. When everything else is kind of in turmoil, the band has been a constant. I think, outside of my family life, it's the one thing that's been just there.
Yeah.
That can be relied on. And that's just a good laugh.
It is.
It's a good laugh.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So listen, if you're watching on YouTube, which you can do, Stuart didn't know you could. But you'll see House of Ashes is right here. Oh, nice. It's on my shelf behind me, but that's out now. Your next book comes out next year, though, is it? Next year, next summer?
Yeah, it's I was very adamant with this when I want the US and UK publications to be around the same time.
Yeah.
So to get it, had to sort of get everything to work. It has to be sort of in the next summer. But I'm excited for this one. It's the first part of a trilogy. And it's going, I'd consciously moved away from the sort of horror aspect of things in my writing over several books. But this one I've gone sort of full circle and fully embraced it again. So it's kind of, I think it's going to be sold as kind of a crossover thriller horror kind of idea.
I mean, I think it's going to be huge, because I think it's not out there at the moment like it. So I think it's just going to be, people are going to be talking about it a lot.
I hope.
It's fantastic and it's great. I mean, it's amazing that, like, like you sent it to me, like, I think it was coming up on a year since you actually sent, maybe 6 months since you sent it to me, and it's like, I can't believe there's going to be like another year until we can all start talking about it a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I finished the first draft, I think, September of last year.
Yeah.
It's not going to come out till August of next year. So it's nearly 2 years from finishing the book to it actually coming out. But again, COVID has had this sort of concertina effect on the publishing business. All the books were held back and then are being put out, so that everything's kind of being pushed back. But I'd rather it got published well than published in a rush.
Exactly. And I have every faith that that's what's going to happen now. Does it have a title yet, by the way?
Blood Like Mine.
Blood Like Mine. Look out for that in summer 24. But yeah, Stuart, this has been absolutely brilliant. you know, it's you've been very honest, and I think people listening and watching us will know that and appreciate it. I know I do. I'll see you the next gig, which is in a few weeks' time. We're up in Glasgow.
In sunny Glasgow.
In sunny Glasgow in the middle of May for I Write. It's always my favourite time of year. Is when we kind of get kicking again. So thanks very much, Stuart, for being on the show. And I'll see you soon, mate.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you next time.